I'm Alex Hirsch, the voice of Old Man McGucket.
I'm Rob Renzetti, the voice of no one.
You're the voice of reason.
The voice of reason. Yes, that's my voice.
And this is Society of the Blind Eye.
With a very unreasonable character, Mr. Fiddleford McGucket.
So I don't know if a lot of people know this, but at the very end of season 1, we knew that there was going to be a long hiatus, and so we decided to make some shorts. And I wanted to hide some really cool codes in the shorts because at this point we knew that fans were going to find any code we hid.
Yeah.
And so we came up with this cool visual of this eye with an X through it. And I thought, okay, if you watch all of Dipper's Guide and you cut together there's a frame in each one. If you put them together, it's an image, and inside that image is a message, and that message is search for the blind eye. And I had no idea what it meant.
Yeah, it meant nothing. It meant nothing more than that.
It was
right?
literally meaningless. It was just like, that's a really cool sounding phrase, isn't it?
I like it.
I'll bet we could think of something cool to do it, assuming we do a second season, which I'm not fully sold on yet. And then when we started to do a second season, I was like, uh-oh.
Now I got to pay it off.
We need to figure out what that means. I'll say this. I was obsessed with secret societies when I was in high school. I wore a Shriner's Fez to prom, which shows you, A, how committed I was to it, and B, why girls didn't like me.
Yeah, no, you were making mistakes.
You better believe I was. And I was like, I would go to all of the old rummage sales, and I would go to graveyards, and I would go to antique shops, and I'd look for anything connected to Shriners, to Masons.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with Skull and Bones and the Illuminati.
Sure.
And you know the Stone Masons episode, the episode of The Simpsons.
Yeah, what a great episode.
Like that was like my favorite episode growing up, and I was like, we've got to do a Secret Society episode at some point.
Yeah.
And so Search for the Blind Eye, maybe there's a Society of a Blind Eye, and from that we work backwards to, sounds like maybe they use memory guns.
Well, the whole thing was like we had to rehabilitate McGucket in some way.
Well, that
because
was
we knew he was going to factor into the end, and yet we'd set him up. It's interesting because rewatching these episodes, I would have told you McGucket was in every other episode, whatever. He's in almost every episode we did. He has at least one gag where he's like, "Here's the dumb hillbilly."
There's a lot of McGucket in season
and
1.
none of that was intentional. I feel like I remember you put him in the Gobblewonker, and Eric Coleman, who was our kind of the big exec at Disney, like really responded to him, and he's like, "Hey, that character." Got a star character there. Yeah. And we're like, what? Really? The dumb hillbilly character? That's the guy that stood out. But because of that, like, it made us reconsider him and use him more than we would have otherwise done.
We talked about in season 1 how there was no continuity when we first came up with him. And season 2, I remember when I finally agreed, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going back into the breach. We're doing a second season. Part of my mission was I wanted to address a lot of the things that I wasn't happy with in season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those, there's characters like McGucket, who is just a one-dimensional character. Characters like Pacifica, like I wanted to see a sweet side to Robbie. I was like, can we take these characters who are just kind of one-note jokes, and can we breathe life into them? And it was one of our very early conversations about, let's have a whole fake-out with McGucket potentially being the author.
Right.
And we had a couple very different ideas. There's that one with the underwater town, remember? Where McGucket builds a submarine. And
that was always a fun idea, but we never cracked that. I love the idea that part of Gravity Falls was underwater.
And that McGucket had like something down there.
Yeah.
But in order to justify, so many of these things are us working backwards from what is our goal? Our goal is we want to do a Secret Society episode. We need to pay off that random phrase that I threw into code words, and we want to dimensionalize McGucket. And if you say, okay, well, if McGucket is connected to the history of the show, but he doesn't remember, and we've got a society called Society of the Blind Eye, maybe they're a society of memory erasers.
Yeah.
It literally is, we're building this out of those pieces of what we need.
Yeah, out of what we needed.
And Matt Chapman was one of the writers on this episode. The first draft, we thought, okay, to make it Gravity Fallsy, if it's a secret society, we need to put them somewhere weird. So originally, do you remember this, Rob? They were the secret society was in an old like Blockbuster, like an abandoned video store.
It was like a video store. It was almost like a video factory. Like it was like a video store, but then there was a like where they manufactured the videotapes too. I think we ended up in a factory at some point.
And I think part of that was the idea of like, oh, we could find an old tape of the young McGucket, and it could be an old videotape, and maybe the tape is lost.
Yes.
And there was also this idea of like, oh, it's Gravity Falls. We never just play it straight.
Right.
If it's a haunted house, it's a haunted convenience store.
Exactly.
But I remember I was really jazzed on it. I remember I read that draft of the script, and I was like, this is our big mystery episode, and it feels too silly.
Yeah.
Like part of my mission for season 2 was also I wanted to treat the mystery take it more seriously and like really kind of some of the promises in episodes. Like I remember when I first saw Irrational Treasure back, Brad Breek's score added this feeling like there's something really going on here.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to do an episode that feels like that. So we made a late change to say, okay, it takes place at the History Museum. These guys are in red robes chanting inside Skull and Bones. Like we're like, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Because like, you know,
well, and also McGucket is silly enough on his own. And,
yes.
I mean, he's kind of bringing the silly aspect of the show just by being in it and being in it so prominently.
Yeah, he adds the ridiculousness enough. And we thought it would be a good fake out. And I actually, in season 1, when fans were starting to figure out Stan's got a brother, I was like, oh, shoot. We didn't come up with a red herring. Like one of my big mistakes in season 1 is we've got this question of who's the author without a good setup for a red herring for who they could be, and that's part of why fans figured it out. So I was like, well, it's the era of the internet fandom. Let me try something that's never been done before. I'm going to leak a fake screenshot of McGucket as the author, and I'm going to start hopefully getting this. I'm going to create a red herring through internet trolling.
Perhaps your finest moment on the show was scamming the fans that way.
Well, it was, I was like, let's try every tool at our disposal. Maybe this will work.
It was a good idea because we had a whole season until they get to the answer.
We knew there was going to be
figured out
at least a year before people got to it, so we needed a red herring. So I leaked that fake screenshot, and then this episode was meant to be the big payoff.
Yeah, and this is kind of a continuation of that idea. There's like, is McGucket the author? Does that even make sense? How could it make sense?
It seems plausible, and I think it was. The idea that he wasn't the author but worked with the author was just enough of we're getting closer, it's getting more complicated. We feel like we got some answers, but we're hungrier for questions and hungrier for answers than we were before.
Yes.
Which is a good mystery, answers stuff, but makes you even more curious.
And eventually when we get to Ford and see their backstory and see their relationship, it just makes all the stuff that happens with the portal and what happens with Ford and all that more poignant that he had someone there who was not only his friend, but also a voice of reason and telling him to stop and that he wouldn't listen to him. As opposed to Ford being down there on his own with nobody to bounce off anything off or anybody to say, hey, wait a minute, is this a good idea?
Well, and Rob and I co-wrote Journal Number 3. And, we have a lot of different people on these commentary tracks, and I'd say Michael Rianda, he was one of the guys who was best with sort of making the characters likable and heartfelt and also pushing us to do the most insane gags. I think one of the things that Rob really brought to this show that nobody else could have was the amount of care and consideration about the mysteries and about trying to make this stuff work and make it track, because I feel like a lot of people just don't have a head for season arcs and season continuity, and you were really a kindred spirit with me in that and trying to make this stuff work. And when we wrote the journal, it was so great to finally all the conversations we had because once we started to figure this out, okay, McGucket was the assistant, and he was maybe this assistant who was sort of put upon, and Ford kind of brought a college buddy together with him, almost as Ford, as somebody who lost Stan, is kind of looking for, even though he rejected his brother, he kind of needs that other person, and he tried to find that in this kind of sweet prodigy, and he just pushed him too far. And it was so much fun actually finally getting to write that story. But at this point we were figuring out those pieces. Got to give a shout out to Peter Serafinowicz, amazing comic actor. He's also the voice of Darth Maul.
Wow.
I
did not know that.
He can do pretty much anything.
He's amazing. He's got such gravitas in his voice. It's just natural.
And his kid was a fan of the show, which is why he agreed to do this.
I mean, that's why we got a lot of the big voices we got season 2, right? Because it was out there and it started to have a reputation. It was much easier to attract that big name talent to the show and get them to come in and do something, no matter how small.
I remember him bringing his child to the record, and he was in Britain, so he was, we were doing it remotely. But I remember he said, I'm happy to do the show. It's for my son here. Say hello, Sam. And I heard this cute little British kid go, I love Gravity Falls. And it was like the most satisfying moment.
Did you picture him like with coal on his cheeks and
please, I'm starving. Give me porridge. I'm a chimney sweep, I am. Like it was so sweet, and it made me feel so good about I almost didn't do more show, and I was like, okay, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I did more Gravity Falls.
Yes.
This cute, adorable kid needs it.
Yes, he needed it. Everybody did.
A lot of these just funny jokes about just unsee you later, and it is unseen. I think Matt Chapman, I have to give him a lot of credit for that in his early draft of this. Also got to give our prop designers, that mind eraser is so cool.
Yeah.
the way that it was resolved. I think Sabrina's storyboards, I think she might have figured out the pieces, this sort of weird steampunk piece of machinery where it zaps your mind erasing it, and it keeps that data somehow in a canister, but it also records you. And
It makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
You buy it.
But I love it.
I mean, also, wasn't Sunil the director on this episode? Sunil Hall?
Oh, yes. I got to give Sunil some credit for that as well.
He's got a mind for that kind of stuff. He actually started as a prop designer on my show.
No kidding.
As Teenage Robot, and I was
Sunil's
so
brilliant.
lucky to get him.
He's brilliant.
With all the crazy props we did on my show, he just really was a really strong asset. And obviously, it was clear he was going to do much more than just be a prop designer.
He was a new director this season.
I was very lucky to get him at the time I got him.
Oh, and we were lucky to get him on this show because he's one of
yeah.
those rare directors who can do everything.
Yeah.
Like, he can do funny stuff better than anybody. He can pose out any action. He can figure things out in a way that nobody else can.
A beautiful mind in the best sense of the word.
Absolutely. This was something I was obsessed with pneumatic tubes as a kid.
As well you should be. Because they're awesome.
Like, you're hearing, I was obsessed with Shriners and pneumatic tubes. Like, I was Dipper.
We know who you are. We know at this point.
I always wanted to put them in an episode, and I liked the idea that all these canisters are hidden.
Yeah. I mean, I could believe that as old as this society is from the 80s, that they were, even though this technology is much older than that they were using it back then.
Ian, one of my requests for Ian, our art director, was I was like, I want a bunch of ancient-looking symbols. So he had to come up with plausible, fake, ancient-looking symbols, which is like all these symbols on these pillars. You totally believe that they are ancient societies. They're completely made up by Ian.
Did he create all the symbols associated with the portal as well?
Yes.
Those are all amazing.
This is a great scene between Mabel and Wendy.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of scenes that are just Mabel and Wendy hanging out. And when she can kind of be like the cool older sister, we see it in...
I love her.
We see it in Hand That Rocks the Mabel.
Yeah. I love her complete disregard of boys as a concept, too. Like, don't worry about them. You know what I mean? Like, the idea... Mabel is so obsessed with boys, and Wendy's just like, yeah, whatever. They're a dime a dozen. Like, I've had so many boyfriends. It'd be interesting to see what man Wendy might eventually end up with if she ever did settle down and marry a man.
Well, we always...
He'd have to be something. He'd have to be some kind of specimen.
We always imagine that Wendy is... She's so confident, and she's having a good time, and she's comfortable in her own skin. So if a guy seems kind of cool, she's like, yeah, I'll try it out. And then when she's bored, she's like, yeah, no thanks. And leaving them with just this bottomless scar inside their heart.
Speaking of which, here he is. The scarred boy himself.
It was fun to give an opportunity to see some of the repercussions of season 1. That Robbie's still out there. This
and
whole
also
idea,
traumatized by the events
and a little
of
traumatized. This whole idea that there's a society that goes around trying to erase evidence of Gravity Falls' weirdness. That they do it out of this sort of weird, misguided idea to keep the town happy and for everyone's mental health, and that they had a founder who started this that they don't even remember, and that they're kind of on autopilot right now.
Yeah.
It's a very strange concept. Part of the idea was that this might a little bit lend sort of a reason, like, why don't Gravity Falls people freak out about all the magic stuff happening? Like,
it just was like, we could either ignore that,
or we could lean into it.
Or we leaned into it. So we decided to lean into it. Maybe if we'd never done this episode, we would have just ignored it. But it was a good opportunity to kind of explain that away.
It took a lot of different drafts and planning and arguments to find something that felt like it worked. And I remember when you do something like this and you invent a really new piece of canon, you're always wondering, are people going to buy it, or are they going to call BS? And by and large, people are like, this is fun. This is exciting.
Right.
The mystery's a little bit deeper, and we've added some new layers. So, like, generally, if people tend to forgive a bit of contrivance, if it, an inch of contrivance, if it gives you a mile of mystery and entertainment,
and if it's fun,
and if the characters are in character, and if nothing directly contradicts important parts of the series, people are willing to take take the ride with you.
Sure, why not? I mean, I like the idea that the woodpecker man is kind of haunted by this bad decision he made to marry his woodpecker wife.
This is this guy's great design. Phrenology, for those not familiar, in the year 1850, there was a bunch of quack doctors who believed that the shape of your head determined your intelligence, and that they would map out these phrenology heads. It was this total bunk science. You can buy them in antique stores, and I think now Urban Outfitters is like, oh, it's cool to buy. They've started making new phrenology heads because it looks all retro.
Yeah, of course.
But we love the idea that this guy had all these crazy tattoos. We wanted him to not be a joke. We wanted him to be scary.
And he is. It's disturbing to look at him.
That's a caricature of old Rob Renzetti.
I suppose that's me, though you could also argue that I am also blind Ivan and that I have a very bald head.
Every bald character
I do not have phrenology on my head. No, I don't have tattoos like this. But I think there was Alex Kerwin, I think, came in and did some freelance character design.
Excellent character designer.
Art director on my show as well. And I think he did a version of me as a blind Ivan, of course. I think he probably would wish that was the final design, but he's always trying to get me into cartoons. So
artists, we don't have a lot of power in life, but we have it in our drawings. So we're constantly like one-upping each other by caricaturing each other. This is the power that we experience.
Yes, the only power. This is a very vague suggestion that Ivan has put into the gun here. Like summer, you are going to forget. Does that mean the
concept of summer?
They won't remember that there's a season.
That summers exist.
Summer?
I don't know.
But yeah, we didn't have a lot of room on that display to make it too complicated. So.
This season, and in particular this episode, season 1, me and Michael Rianda did a lot of late night rewrites and punch-ups, and he was no longer there. And most writers, they leave at 5 o'clock because that's when a job is over. And I would never demand someone to stay later because it's only for someone crazy enough who wants to, like Mike. But so I had a lot of completely lonely late nights where it was just me and the script trying to do the punch-up that me and Mike used to do together. And a lot of this dialogue comes from those nights. All of them, what they say before they think they're going to die, was something I added very late into the episode.
I love the part about Wendy, how she's stressed all the time, which is obviously not what she shows to the world, but you can see it in there.
Mabel's line about how she only loves some of her stuffed animals is just me thinking about my sister and how she kept her stuffed animals so long. Pretty much all of McGucket's, almost every line of McGucket's dialogue in this episode was added very late in the game, where I realized we've done so many changes to this that we've lost the craziness of McGucket. Yeah. So I had to add him ham boning.
That was great.
And
great
why
addition.
Is there a bandage on my beard? Like I was trying to make him as weird as he used to be.
I like the bandage on his beard moment because it's a hint that he is coming back to himself in a way.
Well, that's
very
interesting.
Subtle. The idea that he's suddenly noticing what a strange appearance he has.
That by going on this adventure, he's starting to bring some stuff
This
back.
is the first time anybody's asked anything of him in probably 30 years, which is these people going like, hey, you're something more than you're presenting. What are you? And him kind of having to focus for a moment and say, am I? Am I something more? What?
And I knew McGucket had to be the hero of this episode because it's so sad. Yeah. This premise that, his mind is erased and he's lost his mind and he used to have so much more.
This is a great moment. When
and that he maybe even did it to himself. I was like, he needs a hero moment.
Yeah,
here.
and this is amazing because he's the one person who can defeat this gun having nothing left in his head, as he says, which is great.
We like it when a character's weakness becomes an unexpected asset. You can't break what's already broken.
That's right.
I like that he headbutts him because it's still like a very hillbilly way of defeating him.
Yes. Well, and also, again, he's using the blunt instrument that he has, which is his brainless head. There's nothing in there that he has to worry about.
That could be hurt.
I used to headbutt. My friend and I in high school and college had a headbutting vendetta against each other, and it did not feel good on my end.
Is this
but
why
I got
you went
the
bald from constantly smashing your head against things?
I'm exaggerating. It happened a few times, but it was enough. It was enough. No, I don't know why I went bald. It's a very sad, tragic story.
Kids, Google Pachycephalosaurus. That's the dinosaur that most resembles Rob.
I don't know that dinosaur,
those bald dinosaurs that bash their heads together.
Yeah, I guess that's me.
Gold miner on your way out.
I'm sorry, but what's my name? Where am I?
Oh, might have overdone that one.
Your name is Toot Toot McBumbersnazzle. You're a traveling banjo minstrel with a song on your heart and funny tattoos on your head.
Yes. I am Toot Toot McBumbersnazzle. Cheers! Toot Toot is my name.
We had to come up with an end for Blind Ivan. We figured, let's make him happy at least.
Yes. That was he deserved to be happy. This is great.
I actually wanted young McGucket's voice to be Jack McBrayer.
That would have been good.
And I think we reached out and we weren't able to get a hold of him, and it was very late in the game. So I'm like, all right, I'm young McGucket.
Well, you are old McGucket, so it makes sense. But I remember you being kind of challenged with like, okay, what does he sound like? How close is he to what he ends up looking like? I think he did a very good job here.
It's basically just my speaking voice plus slight Southern accent.
Yeah.
And our artist did such a great job of finding all these intermediate steps.
Yeah, I remember my contribution to this was counting up the days. I remember late in the day when I would do my pass on the board, it was like, it'd been like less than a year when he was nuts. And I'm like, come on, he's not going to go crazy that quickly. Like, let's get him up at least for a few years where this goes on for a while.
I'm terrible with numbers and dates and math and logic. And whenever there was something about like years or ages or how things fit together, I would just be like, Rob, you handle it and I'll trust. Because I can't, I'm terrible with it.
Yeah, at one point I came up with a little cheat sheet about when the things in the past happened, like when Stanford came to Gravity Falls, what year that was,
what would make it
year
plausible.
he left.
Well, and I would cheat stuff as much as I could, but I would try to. Rob would be always trying to pulling me to make it make sense. That sequence boarded by Sunil, who's also the director of this episode, he did a phenomenal job, and I really wanted to have like a quiet moment here, like. That to me, that whole sequence isn't supposed to be hilarious.
No,
like it's
tragic.
It's supposed to be tragic. Like I know some people are like, oh, that's funny, you get to see all this stuff, but like the point of it is supposed to be like we just wrote this guy off as a joke, and he's actually got a very tragic life, and he's actually got a very mature response to learning that, which is the opposite of the McGucket that we've gotten to know, and part of the idea of the rules of how our memory gun works, which again. When you create fantasy magic, you're creating your own rules. You just have to try, if you can, to be consistent with them. So our idea was the memory gun, it can erase a concept as designated by the dial. It stores, it records you, and it keeps that recording. And that if you watch that recording, things start to come back a little bit. That it hasn't actually completely erased it from your mind. It's more sublimated it somewhere where it's really, really hard to reach. And in the series finale, my concept of Bill is that he wouldn't have, if he hadn't gotten in all those forms and fought Stan, like Stan is the one that destroyed Bill. Like were it just the mind eraser itself, that he would be sublimated somewhere.
Right.
But that like he was weakened in the mindscape and destroyed in the mindscape. But that Stan's memories were being sublimated, and that by looking at the book, in the same way that McGucket's memories come back, they start to come back to the surface.
Now, I know there was a big debate about doing something so consequential to, touching on the continuity in the end tag here, but I really love this, and I'm glad we put it in here.
I was worried that people were like, where's that portal? So I needed a scene where I showed it still going, and the bandage was just so we could have a bandage in a later episode to show it's connected.